The most dangerous man in Chicago fell to his knees in a hospital hallway, not because of a bullet, not because of a rival, but because a janitor in faded green scrubs held the one thing his empire couldn't buy. She looked him dead in the eyes and said 7 words that made his blood freeze. "Your sister's illness isn't what you think." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what she said next. "And your mother already knows." In Chicago, there were men with power. And then there was Giwan. He didn't walk into rooms. Rooms rearranged themselves when he arrived. Police cruisers changed direction when his black SUV rolled past. The kind of man whose name you only said once, and quietly, because saying it twice felt like summoning something you couldn't send back. At 34, Giwan controlled the entire West Side corridor. Drugs, real estate, protection rackets dressed in suits. His operation ran clean on the surface and ruthless underneath. But power like his always has a crack somewhere. His was living in a mansion on the Gold Coast, drinking ginseng tea and watching Korean dramas on a 70-inch screen. His mother, Mirren. Mirren was 63 and carried herself like she had personally built the empire. She taught Jiwon that weakness was a disease, that crying was contagious, and that the family name was a fortress, and every brick had to be perfect, or the whole thing came down. She controlled the household the way Jiwon controlled the streets, with silence, with expectation, with a look that could stop a conversation mid-sentence. And then there was Ji-yoon, 26, brilliant, reckless in the quiet way that scared Ji-won more than any rival ever could. She wanted life outside the empire. Freedom. Things Ji-won couldn't give her because giving them meant losing control, and losing control meant losing her entirely. But that night, something reached her anyway. Ji-won's phone rang at 2:47 a.m. It was the house manager. Ji-yoon had collapsed in her bathroom, blood on the white marble tiles. She was conscious, but barely responsive. Ji-won was dressed and in the car in under 4 minutes. His driver pushed 90 on Lakeshore Drive. The city blurred past the tinted windows like a fever dream. When he arrived at the mansion, he found Mirren standing outside Ji-yoon's bathroom door, arms crossed, face unreadable. "She's fine," Mirren said flatly. "It's nothing. She hasn't been eating properly." Ji-won looked past his mother. Through the cracked door, he could see the blood smeared across the floor. That wasn't skipping meals. "Move," he said. "Ji-won, I said she's fine. This family does not panic over move." Mirren stepped aside, not because she agreed, because she recognized the voice her son used when obedience was no longer optional. Inside the bathroom, Ji-yoon sat on the cold floor, her back against the tub, her skin the color of paper. She looked up at her brother with glassy eyes and whispered something that made his chest tighten. "Don't tell Mommy what the doctor said." And then she passed out. But Mirren had already heard. She stood in the hallway, her face like stone, and she made a decision. One that would set everything in motion. She closed the bathroom door, walked to her room, picked up her phone, and deleted 3 voicemails from Ji-yoon's doctor. A mother's love is supposed to protect, but what happens when a mother decides that protecting the family's image matters more than protecting her own child? If you think you know where this story is going, you don't. And if you're not subscribed yet, you're about to miss the moment that changes everything. Hit subscribe, because this family's darkest secret is still buried. Ji-yoon had stopped asking her mother for help 3 weeks before the collapse. It started with the medication. Her doctor, a private physician outside Ji-won's network, one she'd found on her own, had prescribed a specific course of treatment. Nothing extreme, just consistent medication that needed to be taken daily without interruption. But when the first prescription arrived at the house, Mirren intercepted it. She read the label, she recognized what it was for, and she hid it in the back of her bedroom closet, behind a row of designer handbags that cost more than most people's cars. When Ji-yoon asked about it, Mirren's answer was simple. You don't need that. This family doesn't rely on pills. You're stronger than whatever you think is wrong with you. Ji-yoon tried twice more. Each time, Mirren shut it down. Not with cruelty. Mirren was never cruel in the obvious way. She was cruel in the way that looked like love, the way that said, I'm protecting you, while slowly removing every lifeline. Mommy, the doctor said I need... The doctor doesn't know this family. I do. That was the last time Ji-yoon asked. After that, she started sneaking out. Not to parties, not to clubs, to a free clinic on the south side of Chicago that nobody in Giwan's world would ever step foot in. She registered under a fake name, paid in cash, wore clothes that made her look like she belonged in a neighborhood where people worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford a hospital. The clinic couldn't give her the exact medication she needed, but they kept her stable. Barely. She was deteriorating week by week, managing symptoms instead of treating the cause, because the one person who should have helped her refused to acknowledge the problem existed. But Ji-yoon wasn't just hiding an illness, she was hiding a person. His name was Tae-sung, 29, quiet in the way that made you lean in when he spoke, kind eyes, the kind of hands that fixed things instead of breaking them, and a last name that would get him killed if Giwan ever found out. Tae-sung was a Kwon, younger brother of Han-soo Kwon, the man who ran the South Side Syndicate and had been trying to dismantle Giwan's empire for 5 years. Ji-yoon met Tae-sung at the free clinic. He volunteered there, helping coordinate a community health program he'd started with his own money his family didn't know about. He wasn't there as a Kwon, he was there as a man trying to build something his family would never understand. She didn't know his last name for the first 2 months. By the time she found out, she was in love and carrying her child. Now Ji-yoon lay in a hospital bed at Lakewood Private, admitted under Ji-won's orders, hooked up to monitors that beeped in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Her phone sat face down on the bedside table. It buzzed every 20 minutes with texts she couldn't answer. The latest one read, "He's getting closer. You need to tell your brother before I have to." Sent from an unknown number. But Ji-yoon recognized the voice behind those words. It was Tae-sung, and he was right. The secret was running out of time. Carla had been invisible for 15 years. Not metaphorically, literally. She moved through Lakewood Private Hospital the way air moves through a building, present everywhere, noticed by no one. She mopped the executive wing at 5 a.m., restocked supply closets by noon, and by the time the doctors walked in wearing their white coats, every surface gleamed and Carla was already somewhere else. She was 47, a single mother, born and raised on the South Side in a neighborhood that used to have a name before the developers turned it into condos nobody from the block could afford. Her son Deshaun was 19, sharp mind, sharper instincts. He'd been accepted to Northwestern's engineering program, full academic qualification, partial scholarship. Still $28,000 short per year. Carla worked double shifts 6 days a week. The numbers never changed. But Carla didn't complain. She solved problems, quietly, the way she'd done her entire life. And because no one saw her, she saw everything. She noticed when the pharmaceutical supply for a specific medication started running low 3 months ago, a medication that only one patient on the 7th floor was requesting in unusual quantities under a name that didn't match any insurance records. She noticed when that same patient, a young Korean woman with expensive shoes and terrified eyes, started showing up at the hospital more frequently, always alone, always paying cash, always sitting in the waiting room like she was hiding from someone instead of waiting for treatment. She noticed when 2 doctors on the 4th floor had a hushed conversation in the break room about the Korean patient's condition and how it wasn't what they initially thought. And 3 days ago, Carla noticed something else entirely. She was restocking linens on the 7th floor when she saw Ji-yoon through the cracked door of an examination room, sitting on the edge of the table with her hand pressed flat against her stomach in a way that Carla recognized immediately. She recognized it because she'd sat that same way 20 years ago when she found out about Deshawn. The young woman wasn't dying. She was pregnant. And based on the medication she'd been requesting, the dosage adjustments, and the fear in her eyes, she was trying to keep both the baby and herself alive without anyone finding out. Carla filed this information where she filed everything else, in the quiet vault of her mind behind a door that only opened when the time was right. She had no idea the time would come this fast. The janitor knows more than the Mafia boss, more than the doctors, more than anyone in that hospital, and she hasn't decided what to do with it yet. Stay with me, because when she makes her move, nothing in the story stays the same. Giwan arrived at Lakewood Private Hospital like a natural disaster. 3 black SUVs, 8 men in dark suits, the kind of entrance that makes receptionists reach for the phone and then put it back down because who exactly are you going to call? Jiwan's condition had worsened overnight. Giwan stood in the center of the lobby, jaw clenched, eyes that had already decided someone was going to pay, and demanded the medication his sister needed. The pharmacy director came down personally, sweating through his dress shirt. The medication was out of stock, a supply chain issue. 48 hours to reorder. Jiwan's voice dropped to the register that made grown men forget how to breathe. My sister doesn't have 48 hours. 2 of his men stepped forward. Nurses scattered. The pharmacy director made phone calls with shaking hands. And in the middle of all that chaos, a calm voice cut through like a blade through silk. "Excuse me, sir." Giwan turned. A woman stood there, faded green scrubs, name tag that read Carla, Environmental Services, hair pulled back tight, no makeup, hands that had clearly spent years doing work that nobody thanked her for. She was holding a small plastic bag. Inside it, the exact medication the pharmacy had said was unavailable. "I heard you were looking for this," she said. Not scared, not aggressive, just steady, the way a person speaks when they've spent their whole life being underestimated and decided a long time ago to stop caring about it. Giwan stared at her. His men stared at her. The entire lobby held its breath. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low. Dangerous, but underneath the menace, genuine confusion. Because in Giwan's world, solutions came from money, threats, and connections, not from janitors in scrubs that had been washed so many times the green was almost gray. "I've worked here 15 years, Carla said, meeting his eyes without flinching. "I know where things are. I know how this place works, better than most of the people who sign the checks." She handed him the bag. Giwan took it, still locked on her face, trying to read her the way he read everyone, looking for the angle, the motive, the leverage. He found nothing, just clarity, and that unsettled him more than any threat ever had. He turned to walk toward Giwan's room, but Carla's voice stopped him. "That medicine will help with the symptoms, but it won't fix what's really wrong with her." Giwan froze mid-step. "I've seen her condition before," Carla continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "and if nobody addresses the real issue soon, the medicine won't matter." For 3 full seconds, the most powerful man in Chicago stood completely still in a hospital lobby, held in place by the words of a woman the world had trained him to ignore. Then he walked away, but something had shifted. A crack had formed, and cracks, in empires built on control, have a way of spreading fast. Giwan couldn't shake it. He sat in his car outside the hospital for 45 minutes, engine running, heat blasting. His lieutenant in the passenger seat knew better to speak. "That medicine will help, but it won't fix what's really wrong." He picked up his phone. "Pull everything on my sister. Last 6 months. Phone records, credit cards, GPS. Every clinic, every address. I want it by morning." By 6 a.m., the file was on his desk, and what he found made the room tilt. Giwan had been visiting a free clinic in Englewood 17 times in 4 months, registered under the name Una Park, paid in cash, no insurance, no digital trail. But she'd slipped once, a single ride-share receipt in a secondary bank account. The pickup location, a residential address on South Morgan Street. The name on the apartment lease, Taesung Kwan. Kwan. Jiwon knew that name the way you know the sound of a gun being cocked, instantly, with your whole body. Han-soo Kwan, the man who ran the South Side Syndicate, the man who had tried 3 times to take Jiwon's territory, the man whose people killed 2 of Jiwon's men 18 months ago. And Taesung, Han-soo's younger brother, the quiet one, no criminal record, practically a ghost in his own family. Except now that ghost was with Jiwon's sister. His hands shook. Not from anger, though the anger was there. They shook from the realization that his sister had walked directly into the arms of the one family that could destroy them. He opened the next file, medical records from the clinic. Ji-yoon wasn't just sick. She was 12 weeks pregnant. The father was Taesung Kwan. His enemy's blood was growing inside his sister. Meanwhile, 5 floors up in Lakewood Private Hospital, Carla stood at the window of the supply room on the 7th floor, watching Jiwon's black SUV idle in the parking lot below. She already knew. Not from surveillance, not from files or phone records or intelligence networks, from observation, from 15 years of watching people when they didn't know they were being watched, from recognizing the way a woman holds her stomach when she's carrying a secret that weighs more than the child itself. Carla had figured out in 3 months what Jiwon's entire organization missed, because invisible people see everything, and the things everyone else overlooks, those are the things that hold the most power. Jiwan entered Ji-yoon's hospital room at 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. He closed the door behind him, told his men to wait in the hallway. The click of the latch sounded like the pin being pulled from something that couldn't be put back. He didn't shout. That was the terrifying part. He pulled a chair to the side of her bed, sat down, and placed his phone face up on the mattress beside her hand. On the screen, a photograph. Ji-yoon and Taesung, sitting on a bench in Englewood, her head on his shoulder, his hand on her knee, both of them smiling like 2 people who had forgotten, for just one moment, that the world outside that bench wanted them dead. Ji-yoon looked at the photo, then at her brother, and the color left her face like water draining from a sink. "How long?" Jiwon asked, his voice flat, surgical. 11 months. "And the baby?" Her chin trembled. 12 weeks. Silence, the kind that presses on your chest. "Do you know who he is, Ji-yoon?" "I know who his family is, but that's not who he is. His brother tried to kill me. Twice. Taesung isn't Han-soo. He's nothing like Han-soo. He volunteers at clinics, he builds things, he helps people nobody else. He's a Kwan. And I'm a Park. Does that make me like you?" The words landed in the center of Jiwon's chest and stayed there. Before he could respond, the door opened. No knock. Mirin walked in, the way she always did, like she owned every room and every person inside it. She looked at the phone on the bed, at Ji-yoon, at Jiwon. "End it." Ji-yoon's hand went to her stomach. "End it now, before this stains the family permanently." "This is my child." "This is a mistake, and mistakes in this family get handled quietly." Ji-yoon's eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't break. She looked at her mother and said the words that had been building for 26 years. "You wouldn't even buy my medicine. You hid my prescriptions. You told me I was weak for being sick, and now you want to decide what happens to my child?" The room went silent. Mirin's face didn't change. That was the most terrifying thing about her, the absence of reaction, as if her daughter's pain was simply a problem to be managed, not a feeling to be acknowledged. Jiwon sat between them, His sister on the bed, crying, holding her stomach. His mother by the door, immovable, already calculating the cleanest way to make this disappear. Both of them looking at him, waiting, because in this family, nothing moved until Giwan decided. He opened his mouth, and a knock came at the door. Soft, deliberate. The kind of knock that doesn't ask permission, but requests it anyway. Giwan's lieutenant opened the door. Standing there in her faded green scrubs was Carla. She looked past the bodyguards, past Mirren, directly at Giwan. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly. "Alone. It's about Taesong." And for the second time in 2 days, the most powerful man in Chicago was stopped cold by the woman everyone else looked through. A janitor just walked into a Mafia family's darkest moment. She knows something about the man they all consider the enemy. If you leave now, you'll never know what she's about to reveal. And I promise you, this changes everything. Subscribe, because the next chapter flips this entire story upside down. They stood in the hospital stairwell. Concrete walls, fluorescent light buzzing overhead. The kind of place where conversations happen that nobody is supposed to hear. Giwan's men waited 2 floors down. Carla stood 3 steps above him, not out of defiance, but because that's where she'd stopped walking. She didn't seem interested in power dynamics. She seemed interested in the truth. "Talk," Giwan said. Carla folded her arms. Not defensively, the way a person does when they're about to say something heavy and they need to hold themselves steady. Taesung Kwan came to this hospital 6 months ago. Not as a patient, as a volunteer. He funded a community health program for neighborhoods on the South Side, places where people can't afford to walk through the front door of a building like this. Giwan said nothing, but his eyes narrowed. He didn't use his family name. He didn't show up with bodyguards or black cars. He came in regular clothes, sat in the waiting room with single mothers and elderly people who hadn't seen a doctor in years, and he listened. He coordinated. He wrote checks from a personal account his brother knows nothing about. Why should I care about his charity work? Because his charity work is how he met your sister, and it's also how he met my son. That stopped Giwan. He tilted his head slightly, the smallest gesture, but it meant he had his full attention. My son, Deshaun, 19 years old, accepted to Northwestern, engineering, but I'm a janitor making $16 an hour. The math doesn't add up. It never does for people like us. She paused. Let the weight of that sit. Taesung found out about Deshaun through the program. He paid for his college application fees, arranged tutoring, connected him with a mentor at the university. Not for leverage, not for a favor, because he saw a kid who deserved a chance and decided to give him one. Giwan's expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes was moving. "There's more," Carla said, "and this is the part you need to hear." She lowered her voice. "Taesung has been feeding information to your organization for 8 months. Anonymous tips that helped your people avoid 2 ambushes. A warning about a shipment interception last October." Giwan's body went rigid. He's been sabotaging his own brother's plans, not because he's loyal to you, because your sister is the woman he loves, and he won't let her get caught in the crossfire. The stairwell was silent. "Why are you telling me this? What do you get out of it?" Carla's voice didn't shake, but it changed. Heavier, more personal. 15 years ago, your men burned down my neighborhood to expand your territory. 3 blocks, 47 families. My house was on the corner of 63rd and Loomis. Giwan's face went blank. "I lost my home. My husband, Raymond, went back inside because our photo albums were on the 2nd floor. The staircase collapsed, and he didn't make it out." The air in the stairwell turned to stone. "I've spent 15 years deciding whether to hate you or be better than you, and every single morning I wake up and I choose to be better. Not for you, for my son,
for the woman I decided to become when the world you built took everything from me." She unfolded her arms, stepped one stair closer. "So when I tell you that Tae-sung Kwan is not your enemy, I need you to understand that this isn't mercy. This is a woman who lost everything because of your empire standing in front of you, telling you the truth anyway. Because the truth is the only thing I've got left that nobody can burn down." Giwan didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice sounded different, smaller, like a man hearing something for the first time he should have heard years ago. "I didn't know." "You didn't look," Carla said simply. "Powerful people never do." For the first time in his adult life, Giwan couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse on the 42nd floor, the Chicago skyline spread out below like a kingdom, his kingdom, and for the first time, it looked like wreckage. He replayed Carla's words. 47 families, 63rd and Loomis, a husband who went back inside for photo albums and never came out, a woman who rebuilt everything on $16 an hour and the kind of dignity that money can't buy. He called his lieutenant. "The expansion on the south side, back in 2011, how many families did we displace?" Long pause. 47 residential units, maybe more. We didn't keep count of the people." Didn't keep count of the people. Ji-won sat with that sentence for a long time. The next morning, he went to Ji-yoon's room. No entourage, no bodyguards outside the door, just him. He pulled the chair close, the same one from the day before, and sat down. "Tell me about him," he said. "About Tae-sung?" "Yes." She searched his face for the trap, for the anger, for the calculation she'd grown up learning to recognize in every conversation with her family. She didn't find it. So she talked. She told him about the clinic, about how Tae-sung organized supply drives and drove elderly patients to appointments in his own car, about how he hated his family's business and had been building an exit strategy for years, about how he held her hand during her first ultrasound and cried when he heard the heartbeat. He's not what his last name says he is. He's what he chose to become despite it. Giwan let that sit. Then he asked the question that had been forming behind his ribs since the stairwell. "Does he know what I've done? The things my organization—" "Yes, he knows everything. And he chose to protect me anyway." Giwan stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city. His phone buzzed. His lieutenant's name on the screen. The message read, "Hansu Kwan found out about Tae-sung. He's been leaking our intel. Hansu says Tae-sung has 24 hours. 24 hours. Giwan had solved every problem in his life the same way. Money, men, violence. But this time, none of them would work. Moving soldiers towards Hansu's territory would trigger a full-scale war, exactly what Hansu wanted. Doing nothing meant Tae-sung dead by morning, and Ji-yoon would never forgive him. He needed movement that didn't look like movement, an operation invisible to every surveillance system and informant. He needed Carla. He found her in the hospital's basement, restocking cleaning supplies from a metal cart. She looked at him like she'd been expecting him. "I need your help," Ji-won said. He'd never said those 4 words to anyone in his life. "I know," Carla replied. "Sit down. I already have a plan." She explained it calmly. The hospital had service tunnels, staff corridors, and loading docks connecting to back alleys and service roads. Carla knew every inch. But it wasn't just the hospital. She knew the invisible network of the entire South Side. Janitors at office buildings, delivery drivers running pre-dawn routes, overnight security guards who saw everything and reported nothing. "These are people nobody watches," Carla said. "That's exactly why this works." Within 3 hours, Carla coordinated the quietest extraction in Chicago history. A hospital orderly drove Taesung out through the basement loading dock in a supply van. A night janitor at a parking garage held a side entrance open. A delivery driver rerouted his 4 a.m. bread run to include a stop at a safe house that wasn't in any database because it belonged to the cousin of a cafeteria worker who owed Carla a favor from 2019. No guns, no convoys. Hansu's people saw nothing because they were looking for soldiers, not janitors, orderlies, and bread delivery drivers. By 5:47 a.m., Taesung was safe, sitting across from Giwan at a folding table in a basement that smelled like flour and industrial cleaner. "I love your sister," Taesung said. No preamble, just truth. "I know," Giwan replied. "I've been working against my own family to keep her safe." "I know that too, now." "So what happens next?" Jiwon looked at the ceiling, then at the man his sister had chosen. "You help me end this cycle. Not with war, we dismantle what needs dismantling. Together." Taesung extended his hand. Jiwon took it, and somewhere in that grip, something old and rotten started to break apart. Later that morning, Jiwon walked through the hospital lobby. Ji-yoon was being discharged. Taesung was with her. The color was already returning to her face. And then, from the far end of the corridor, Mirin appeared. She'd been watching. She always watched. She walked not towards Jiwon, not towards Ji-yoon, but towards Carla, who was mopping the floor near the east entrance, invisible as always. Mirin stopped 3 feet from her. Her voice was ice. "You think you saved this family. You have no idea what you've started." Carla didn't look up from the mop. She just said, "I didn't start anything, ma'am. I just refused to look away." Mirin made her move on a Thursday. She waited until Jiwon was in a meeting, until Ji-yoon was resting. Then she called a number she'd kept hidden for years. Hansu Kwon answered on the second ring. "I know where your brother is," Mirin said. "I'll give you the address. In exchange, you leave the park name out of whatever comes next." She would rather sacrifice her daughter's happiness than let the family name be associated with a Kwon. In Mirin's mind, this wasn't betrayal, it was maintenance. But Mirin made one mistake, the same mistake powerful people always make. She forgot about the invisible woman. Carla had seen Mirin slip into the empty administrative office. She noticed the controlled urgency, someone making a move they didn't want witnessed. She pressed her ear to the door and heard every word. She recorded it on her phone, a $200 device in the hands of a woman making $16 an hour, holding the fate of a Mafia empire in a voice memo. She brought the recording to G1 within the hour. He listened once, his face went blank. Listened again, his hands curled into fists. Not the fists of a mafia boss planning violence, the fists of a son realizing his own mother was willing to get a man killed to protect a reputation. He went to Mirin. She was sitting in the hospital's private lounge, drinking tea like nothing had happened. Jiwon placed his phone on the table, pressed play. Mirin's own voice filled the room, calm, measured, deadly. When the recording ended, Mirin didn't deny it. She straightened her back and said, "Everything I've done has been for this family. You refused to buy Ji-yoon her medicine. You hid her prescriptions. You told her she was weak. You tried to end her pregnancy. And now you're selling the father of her child to the man who wants him dead." He stood. "You don't protect this family, Mother. You poison it." Mirin's hands, for the first time Jiwon could ever remember, trembled. "I am your mother, and Ji-yoon is your daughter, and you chose your pride over her life. Every single time." Mirin was removed from the family's inner circle that week. Not with violence, not with public shame, quietly. The same invisibility she had imposed on everyone she deemed beneath her was now imposed on her. She kept her home, she kept her comfort, but she lost the one thing she valued more than love: control. And then Ji-yoon did something no one expected. He called Carla into his office at Lakewood, the same office where, days earlier, his men had terrorized the staff.
He sat across from her and spoke plainly. You saved my sister. You saved Taisung. You exposed my mother. And 15 years ago, my organization destroyed your home and killed your husband. Carla didn't look away. I can't undo what happened on 63rd and Loomis, Giwan said, but I can make sure it means something. He set up a scholarship fund in Carla's name, the Carla Washington Educational Foundation, covering Deshawn's tuition and a rolling endowment for 20 students per year from the neighborhoods his empire had displaced. Carla was offered a permanent position as community health coordinator at Lakewood. Not charity, recognition. Deshawn started at Northwestern that fall, full ride. His orientation packet had a small note. Your mother's courage built this. Make it count. Jiyun and Taisung moved to the north side. Quiet neighborhood, good schools nearby. She was 6 months along, healthy, glowing, free for the first time from a family that confused control with love. Taisung continued his community work openly now, under his own name. He and Jiyun weren't friends, maybe they'd never be, but they were building something neither family had ever attempted, a bridge where there used to be a battlefield. And Jiyun, the man Chicago whispered about, started looking at the people his empire had made invisible. Not all at once, not perfectly, but deliberately, because a woman in faded green scrubs had shown him that the people you overlook are the ones holding everything together. One afternoon, Carla walked through the hospital lobby. Her new badge read Community Health Coordinator. Her scrubs were still green because she chose them. Some things you keep to remember where you came from. A new janitor was mopping the floor near the entrance. Young woman, head down, invisible. Carla stopped, looked at her. They'll never see you coming, and that's your greatest advantage. The janitor looked up, smiled, and Carla walked on, through the lobby she'd cleaned 10,000 times, into a life she'd built not from power or revenge, but from the quiet, unshakable belief that dignity is something no empire can take from you unless you let it. The Mafia boss didn't fall because of a rival, a bullet, or a betrayal. He changed because a woman in faded green scrubs held the one thing his empire couldn't manufacture: the truth. And in Chicago, the truth doesn't set you free, it rearranges who holds the power. If this story touched something in you, if you felt that shift, then you already know this channel is different. We don't just tell stories here, we tell the ones that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Subscribe to Tales by Wave, because the next story might be the one that changes how you see the world. And if you're still not subscribing, drop a comment and tell me why. I want to hear from you.